Matt, let's go to you first. If we have a look at the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald, there's a little bit on the front of the SMH. We'll get to the Oz very shortly. The Oz's Andrew Clennell and Sky News contributor has broken this story. Rebel Liberal MPs in bid to topple Premier today. Is the headline. 3 rebel Liberal MPs say they will move a spill motion against Premier Gladys Berejiklian in the party room today over her shameful handling of the abortion bill. Mulgoa MP Tanya Davies, the government's most vocal critic of the bill, and Upper House Liberals Matthew Mason-Cox and Lou Amato will move the motion. Never seen anything so stupid in all my life, Matt Cunningham, in politics, having watched it in Australia and this country for nearly 40 years. This woman went to the election, won the election handsomely, and now they want to roll her? What's going on?
Well, I'd almost agree with you, Gleeso. Unfortunately, I've had the pleasure of covering Northern Territory politics for the best part of a decade. So I can tell you that seeing leaders rolled after they've been in the job for 6 months, leaders knifed in midnight coups, that's nothing unusual up here in the top end. But you're right, it's absolute madness. Where is the win in this for these rebel MPs? So they go to this spill tomorrow. Now, I think the best information that we've got at the moment is that they might only get the 3 votes that they have at the moment. They might get maybe 1 or 2 more. I can't see them getting 10. And then what do? Then they go to the crossbench. I mean, they're really just blowing themselves up over this issue. They need to sit down and resolve this internally now. Obviously, they haven't been able to do that. But to attack someone like Gladys Berejiklian, who, you know, as you say, won an election just 6 months ago. She's presiding over a strong economy in New South Wales. She fought off every challenge that came her way from the Labor Party before that last election. You know, I think you're right. This is absolute madness on behalf of the New South Wales Liberals.
Scotty, you've been around politics a long, long time. Now, I don't think there's any doubt that she's botched this particular piece of legislation. I think she's handled it very poorly, and a lot of people will acknowledge that. But to throw her premiership out the window, off the back, one swallow doesn't make a summer, as they say.
Well, look, you're quite right, Gleeso. Look, I think the whole issue has been handled very poorly. Remember, there was a delay in terms of having the vote for the upper house, all those kind of issues. It's been allowed to escalate well beyond a very serious matter, but well beyond in terms of the political saneness of this. But now we're entering the whole insanity of what we're talking about breaking tonight and what's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, and as Matt just said, 6 months ago, Gladys Berejiklian won the election again handsomely. There was concerns in terms of how it might go in the lead up to that election, but she won it easily. She's got an economy that's going well. They've got project after project about to open, and now they're throwing her under the bus. And as you say, Glee, so what's going to happen now? They don't get the numbers tomorrow. What do they go to the crossbenches? Where's that leave the government? Where does that leave her premiership? Where's that leave the party, which is in such a strong position? And then there's the ramifications that flow on across the entire state, and I suspect also in terms of federal politics.
Matt and Scott, I just want to pose the question about the broader issue here of stability in politics in this country. Over the last 10 or 15 years, we've seen a conga line of leadership spills, of PMs knifed, of premiers deposed. We know in Queensland that if Anastasia Palaszczuk had have banished Jackie Trad to the backbench, which he should have done, she probably would have been challenged by the left of the party, who have the numbers in caucus and in cabinet. I'll start with you, Scott. I mean, you know, at a time when we're trying to, you know, win a 2032 Olympic bid for Australia off the back of political stability, economic stability, what is this fascination about trying to topple leaders in this country right now?
Well, we seem to have gone through this whole period of madness for the last 6 or 7, 8, 10 years. And that's, I think to some extent, that's also the extraordinary situation we now have in Canberra with Scott Morrison's leadership, where we have the vast majority of the party room strongly behind him. We haven't seen that kind of stability and a leader with that kind of strength and support for a long time. And I think some people in Canberra, inside what Scott Morrison would call the bubble, are a bit concerned about it. It's a bit boring there because we don't have that kind of speculation floating around in Canberra at the moment. But it doesn't mean it's not occurring all the way around the rest of Australia, and what we're seeing unfolding in New South Wales tonight is just another example of why the public, I think, kind of cast their heads up and say, well, what the madness are we seeing in terms of our political leaders?
Matty, you mentioned the shenanigans that have gone on in the Northern Territory, you know, the mango madness, you know, the pineapple politics that we see in the top end, and yet in many respects the rest of the country has been immune to that sort of madness, and yet here we're seeing it in, as Scott so eloquently put it, a state that is fundamentally doing well economically. You know, its infrastructure programs are right up there with some of the best in the world, and they want to depose their premier. I mean, these people are... I'm gobsmacked.
Yeah, I think, speaking more broadly to the issue, Glee, so I reckon there's a couple of things at play that are the reason that we've seen more of this instability, and not just here in the top end. You know, you saw Ted Baillieu was rolled as Premier in Victoria, although there was quite a scandal that went around the fact that he had to be replaced by Dennis Napthine, but you're seeing it now in New South Wales. Of course, we've seen it up here plenty of times in the top end. I think, and of course federally, it's just been the constant until Scott Morrison's rise to the Prime Ministership last year. But the two main things I think are at play, one is the rise of social media. There's this constant noise. And so whoever is the leader, whether they're the Premier or the Chief Minister or the Prime Minister, there's this constant noise in these echo chambers telling them that they're not doing the right thing, you know, that they're unpopular, that people are angry about decisions, whether they are angry or not. That noise is always there, and their colleagues are reading this stuff and it's sort of, you know, playing on their minds, and so, you know, they're getting a little bit agitated when they otherwise might not have. I think a leader's ability to ride out that sort of storm when there's been a bit of controversy, it's a much tougher thing to do now than it was 15 or 20 years ago when you didn't have that noise of social media. You have to wonder whether John Howard would have been able to ride out the changes he brought into gun laws in the wake of the Port Arthur massacre if social media existed back then. The other thing I think that's at play, and we're seeing more and more of this, is a dirty little three-letter word called ego, Gleeso. And you see these people who get into politics, they're only into politics for themselves, and they've got their eye on the top prize and they want to grab it at whatever cost. You know, you saw it with Malcolm Turnbull. You've seen it here in the Northern Territory. You see it time and time again. People who just get ahead of their station, they put themselves ahead of the party and ahead of the country or the state, and generally it ends in tears. I mean, there are not too many examples of when a leader has been replaced and it's ended well for a political party. Of course, the exception is Scott Morrison last year, but there were some pretty exceptional circumstances at play, both in the way that he rose to be the Prime Minister and in the election that he won in May this year.
Well, you're so right, Matt. I mean, it was Skyhooks that said that ego is not a dirty word, but it certainly is when it comes to politics. Before we leave this topic, let's head to the front of the Australian, and of course there you can see a very glum-looking Gladys Berejiklian. Rebel Liberals call spill against Premier, and it says Rebel Liberal MPs will move an empty chair spill motion against New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian over abortion legislation tomorrow morning, Tuesday morning, putting her leadership in doubt. Now, Andrew Clennell, as I said, who is Sky contributor and also the New South Wales political editor for The Australian, he's done a comment piece which says no matter what happens today, it spells trouble. If the motion is defeated, Tanya Davies may have to go, threatening the government's majority.